So India wants to play both sides again. On one hand, it claims to support a multipolar world order and says it's open to reviving the Russia, India, China troika. But on the other hand, it's cozying up to the United States, Japan, and Australia in the so-called Quad Alliance, an openly anti-China and anti-Russia bloc. Isn't it funny how India wants to sit at every table but never commit to anything real? It's no wonder why they are geopolitically isolated and have no allies. They only really have a master, that being the United States. Let's break this down. Recently, India's Ministry of External Affairs hinted at bringing back the RIC platform, where Russia, India, and China meet to talk about global issues. This trilateral format has been dormant since COVID-19, and more importantly, since the violent 2020 Ladakh border clashes between India and China, where Chinese forces humiliated Indian forces in melee combat. But now, Russia is eager to restart it. Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has been vocal, saying that this could balance Western-led alliances like NATO and the Quad. Even China is on board. Beijing said the RIC could promote global stability and regional cooperation. It makes total sense for this to be revived, since Russia is locked in conflict and China is an ascendant world power, which now dominates the global trade and supply chain network which was once held by the US and Europe. But let's not get carried away. While India claims it's interested, it is given no timeline, no commitment, and no real enthusiasm. Why? Because in reality, India has been drifting deeper into America's orbit. Think about it. For decades, Russia was India's most reliable friend. During the Cold War, the Soviet Union poured massive aid into India, everything from military hardware to industrial plants. When the West ignored India, Moscow stood by its side. It was Soviet tanks and MiG fighter jets that propped up India's military. It was Soviet engineers who helped build India's steel plants and space program. It was Soviet grain that fueled the hungry workers of the young, independent Indian nation. And yet, today, India acts like Russia is a distant acquaintance. Just look at Ukraine. While India has avoided directly criticizing Russia at the UN, it hasn't exactly supported Moscow either. Instead, it increased oil imports when convenient but stayed silent when the West piles sanctions on Russia. That's not loyalty, that's opportunism. And let's not forget how Modi dropped everything and caught the first flight to Washington after Trump's inauguration. He didn't even receive a prime ministerial welcome, just an awkward hug from Trump and some handshakes and pleasantries. Then he was more than happy to sign trade deals that benefited the US far more than India, in hopes of avoiding tariffs, which didn't work because India got tariffed anyway. These deals included buying expensive American oil and gas while cutting down on Russian imports, buying American military hardware and accepting deportees. And then there's China. Can we really believe India is serious about sitting down with Beijing as an equal partner? This is the same China that has around the same population base as India, but has a GDP that is 5 times larger. This is the same China that manufactures a third of the world's goods, while India manufactures a mere 3%. This is the same China that humiliated India in the 1962 war, stamping its authority on Aksai Chin and breaking India's hopes and ambitions all in 1 month. More recently in Ladakh, Chinese troops gave India another bloody nose, forcing New Delhi into a humiliating retreat. Let's not forget China's ironclad friendship with Pakistan, India's sworn enemy. Beijing is funding massive infrastructure projects in Pakistan and providing military support, while India complains but does nothing meaningful to stop it. And let's not forget the recent escapade into Pakistan, where India sent in fighter jets all guns blazing, only to lose many of them in the space of a few hours. Yeah, it was humiliating. Now Russia wants to revive the RIC troika as a counterweight to America's dominance. This fits perfectly into Moscow and Beijing's vision of a multipolar world order, one where Washington can't dictate terms to everyone else. But here's the problem. India isn't fully on board. It says it wants multipolarity, but its actions scream otherwise. New Delhi has signed defense agreements with the US. It participates in Malabar naval exercises with Washington, Tokyo, and Canberra. It parrots Western narratives about freedom of navigation in the South China Sea, a thinly veiled jab at China, and it wants to be seen as the West's favorite democracy in Asia, even though its own government under Modi has been accused of cracking down on dissent and stoking religious tensions. You know that there's 500,000 troops stationed in Kashmir with the sole intention of crushing dissent, right? It's farcical. And Russia and China see through this. They know India is trying to hedge its bets, playing the West and the East against each other for its own gain. But how long will Moscow and Beijing tolerate this two-faced behavior? Think about what's at stake. For Russia, bringing India back into a tight trilateral alliance would signal that Washington's efforts to isolate Moscow have failed. For China, having India at the table would make it harder for the U.S. to use New Delhi as a pawn in its anti-China strategy. But from India's perspective, joining hands with Russia and China could anger Washington, and New Delhi doesn't seem willing to take that risk. This is not the first time India has behaved like this. During the Cold War, it claimed to be non-aligned, but leaned heavily on Soviet support. Now it claims to want a balanced, multipolar order, but in reality it wants the best of both worlds. It wants cheap Russian oil, Chinese trade, and Western military technology, all without committing to any side. That's not strategy, that's indecision. And let me tell you, this may help India in the short term, but in the long term, it will seriously harm India's standing with the rest of the world. Let's be honest. If India was serious about the RIC, it would have already convened a meeting. It wouldn't be giving vague statements about mutually convenient dates. It wouldn't be clinging to the Quad and hoping Washington will hand it global power status. Even if the angry Indian netizens scream and shout about how India is already a global power, the truth is, India's ambitions are limited by its own contradictions. It talks big about being a Vishwaguru or world leader, but it hasn't resolved its conflicts with China. It hasn't caught up to China economically, and it still relies on Russian weapons while trying to pivot to the West. That's not leadership, that's strategic confusion. Well, maybe I'm being harsh. It has solved its conflict with China by completely and utterly losing. For Russia and China, the time is ticking. If they want to build a genuine multipolar world order, they need partners who are reliable and decisive. Is India really that partner, or is it just another opportunistic player trying to milk both sides while avoiding hard choices? And can Russia and China trust India to be a real ally? Or will New Delhi keep playing this dangerous double game until it gets burned? In my opinion, they should kick India out of BRICS and be done with them. Cut off the rotting limb before it infects the whole body. If you found this breakdown interesting, then please like, comment, and subscribe. Thanks for watching.